This recorded session is an extension of a previous Zoom session in which I went over basic information about the Building Quality Curriculum service, the process and timeline, and some points to remember about the feedback. If you were not a part of that session or haven't already watched the recording, it may be helpful to watch that video before viewing this one. A link to that video is provided in the description below. I'm Diane Smith, a longtime MYP coordinator and IB Educator Network member. My background related to this session is that I was on the educator team that contributed to developing the Building Quality Curriculum service in 2015 and have been a senior reviewer or reviewer ever since. In this session, we're going to go through a process of reviewing a sample unit plan, following the format used by Building Quality Curriculum reviewers. The two primary resources used are the publication Evaluating MYP Unit Plans, which is available on my IB, the Program Resource Center, and an Arts Music Unit Plan that was generously contributed by a new MYP music teacher. So thank you so much to that teacher and coordinator for sharing. Also linked in the description below this video is a Google Doc folder with this unit plan, the full unit review, a blank review document, and a few other resources, so you don't need to worry about taking notes. This link is also provided on the IB Mid-Atlantic Association's networking page. If you would like to use this video to support an in-school professional development session on MYP unit planning, these resources can be downloaded and the video can be paused to allow teachers to evaluate a section of the sample unit on their own and then view the part of the video that describes the feedback pertaining to that unit plan section. This can be an impactful check for understanding, even if the teachers are from subject groups other than arts. So let's get started. You'll be looking over my shoulder and hearing my thinking process as if I were the reviewer for this unit. The thinking process that reviewers go through can be full of backs and forths, so I apologize in advance if some of my thoughts are sometimes a little rambling. Hopefully this process will provide you with insights into how you can consider your own units in terms of what reviewers are looking for when units are submitted to the Building Quality Curriculum service. We first note that the unit is an MYP Year 3 Arts Chamber Orchestra unit. The title is Instrumental Basics, and the unit is 6 hours long. As a reviewer, this information already prompts a number of questions about the nature of the unit. For example, if it's an MYP Year 3 unit about instrumental basics, how does the school organize the arts options? Are students enrolling in a beginning music course in MYP 3? Are there non-beginners in the class? And I'm also wondering about the 6-hour time frame. While there are no minimum unit hours set by IB, units do need to be long enough to allow for substantive learning and assessment, and they usually tend to run at least 20 hours. So my question might be, is the 6-hour time frame long enough to include substantive learning and assessment? So the first place I might look to begin to answer my questions would be the teacher's description of the context of the unit. This is one of the required elements in the documents that schools need to include with each unit plan submitted to the BQC service. The purpose of this information is for the author or authors of the unit plan to help the reviewer understand how and why the unit was developed. So in the case of our sample unit, this is where I would want to find answers to my questions about the MYP Year 3 students being in a beginning orchestra class, and about how a 6-hour unit fits into the larger sequence of the year. The document that accompanied this unit plan appears to be an older version that only included 3 questions, and unfortunately the information provided appears to pertain to a different unit plan, a chorus unit, rather than this orchestra unit. It may be that this teacher received a chorus unit evaluation as an example and hadn't yet changed the description, or it could be that there was some other sort of mix-up. We tend to see these kinds of things actually quite frequently. So I'll need to try to find answers to my questions in the unit plan itself. But first, I'll also look at the school's self-evaluation summary to try to understand the teacher's impression of the unit. I see that most of the unit plan sections are thought to represent an exemplary level, also called a sharing level, and a few of the sections are thought to represent a capable level. As noted in the previous video about the BQC, these categories are based on the descriptions provided in Evaluating MYP unit plans. So at the outset, my basic impression is that whomever completed this evaluation thought that this unit was quite well written. Something to remember, just as a side note, when completing a self-evaluation of your own units for submitting to BQC, is that you are going to be evaluating what is written in the unit plan. It's not an evaluation of how successful or unsuccessful the taught unit was. It's what's written in the unit planner. And in this case, I do have a little hesitation to take this evaluation at face value because of the mix-up in the teaching context. This self-evaluation form is attached to the teaching context, so I'm thinking that this may also reference that chorus unit that the context description was referring to. So I'm not really sure if this self-evaluation pertains to this unit, so it doesn't help me all that much. The main reason for looking at the school's self-evaluation summary is that once I compare these levels with my own evaluation, it's a little glimpse into how clearly the expectations of unit planning are understood by the person who completed the self-evaluation, particularly if the self-evaluation indicates a sharing level for a section, and I find that that same section demonstrates a beginning level. I know that it may be helpful in these kind of situations to add extra guidance in my comments, or I might need to add comments in some sections that recognize that that element of unit planning might be excellent in the taught unit, however, it needs further development in the written description. So back to the unit plan. What I would probably first do is read through the entire unit plan to try to get a general idea about what the unit is about. So starting here in the inquiry section, we can see that this school provided a nice area where they helped the teacher with some tips and some resources just right here in the unit plan. This is really helpful when the instructions are accurate. Sometimes it's not as helpful when the descriptions or instructions don't allow the teacher to demonstrate the sharing levels. So we can see that the 4 key concepts prescribed for arts are aesthetics, change, communication, and identity. And the teacher chose systems. So that's fine. The teacher can choose any of the concepts, but I'm just going to take note of that, systems. And I'm already wondering in my mind, okay, what about systems? Is it about musical systems, about music notation? What is it about? Then the related concepts is structure. I notice that they have chosen scientific and technical innovation, and no exploration is identified. And I'm just going to read the statement of inquiry. Knowledge of scientific principles is necessary to understand the structure and systems of a musical instrument. So you can see that they included at least the key and related concepts, and it looks like they might have thought that scientific principles might be the exploration. So they tried to follow the guidance provided for statements of inquiry. But already in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, so this unit may be about, they're going to tie science in. Maybe they're going to look at the structure of the instruments. Maybe they'll look at the science related to music notation. So I'm going to be looking for evidence of scientific principles and structure and systems in the rest of the unit plan. And I'm going to scroll down and see the inquiry questions. Origins of instruments, how did they develop, why did they develop, and is there a way to hold an instrument? Okay, so I don't see anything about science, so I'm going to keep going. Looks like the summative assessment is about setting up their instrument, completing a maintenance assessment, and demonstrating changing a string, tuning their instruments, and working on their posture. So I want to see that what they think about that summative assessment in terms of the statement of inquiry. So what they're saying is that students will understand the techniques involved in setup, maintenance, and performance that those are based on scientific principles. Again, see, they understand the basics, that scientific principles should be guiding the entire unit. It should be the context for all of the inquiries. And it looks like the summative assessment is intended to be based on that. I'm going to skip over the approaches to learning and go down to the learning experiences and teaching strategies and the content. So they did have the topics that they will be covering, some very basic elements. They also, interestingly, included MYP aims and objectives in the content section. And then the learning experiences and teaching strategies, teachers helping them learn how to change a string, tuning, they're reviewing the setup, your posture, how to use rosin and the bow, demonstrates cleaning and maintenance, and they have a maintenance information sheet. So very basic, and I can see why, if this was the full content, that it's only 6 hours, but already in my mind I'm thinking, this unit may be more of an introduction to a longer unit that has more creative elements in it. The resources are pretty basic, they're instruments and some materials, and then sometimes its most helpful sections is the reflection section, because this, if the teacher has thoughtfully reflected on a full unit plan during each stage of reflection, they're going to tell me quite a bit about the unit. So this teacher expresses some personal feeling of not being sure how to assess the setup. They think this unit is the foundation for the rest of the year and how to handle their instruments. Again, that sounds a little bit like an intro to a longer unit. Then during teaching, they said the checklist was used that they came up with, and they then said the checklist was effective. So they did follow through. We always look for that anything mentioned that is an intention for the unit over here prior to teaching, how did it work, and do they think they were going to use it again? Okay, there were some challenges with it, so if they had put something about how they're going to change it in the future, that would be a little more effective. Okay, and again, they're just making a note that the content of this unit is important. So I've got a basic understanding of the unit. It feels like it is a very beginning orchestra unit, or at least the intro to a unit, in which students receive their instruments. They learn how to tune, how to hold, and how to maintain their instrument. So I'm ready to get started on the more detailed evaluation, and I tend to consider the whole key concept, related concept, global context, and statement of inquiry as a whole. I want to see how they relate to each other. So for the key concept, related concept, and global context and statement of inquiry, what I usually do is just enter what is evident in the unit plan. In the feedback document, I'm going to enter the number of hours, I'm going to enter the key concept, the related concept, the identified global context, and I'm going to note that a specific exploration is not identified. In the statement of inquiry section, I'm going to just put the statement of inquiry, and in case you haven't seen the other video yet, the reason for putting what is evident in the unit plan, sometimes when teachers get back their feedback, they can wonder, why are they just telling me back what I put in my own unit? Well, it's so that you can understand what they are going to base their subsequent feedback and suggestions on. Sometimes it's possible for the reviewer to not find something in your unit plan or to misunderstand something. So they always start with what is evident in the unit plan. If there's no further guidance to provide about a particular section in here, if it's just the key concept makes sense, the related concept makes sense, it's followed throughout the unit, then no other comments would be put here. But in this case, because systems was not one of the prescribed concepts for arts, I wanted to make sure that the teacher understood that that's fine. So a comment such as teachers may choose any of the 16 prescribed key concepts, or they may develop additional concepts to meet the needs of their students or local circumstances. That's a stock comment. And I would put that so they know that that's fine, that they chose systems. And I'm also going to want to remind them that if a concept is chosen other than the prescribed concepts for the subject group, such as the concept systems, it's important to remember that there must be multiple opportunities for students to explore the prescribed concepts over the 5 years of the program. So it's just a little additional note just in case the teacher did not know that. So moving down to the related concept, structure. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a comment for that yet. I'm just going to leave it because I want to consider the learning process a little bit more and the content to see if I can pick up anything else related to that concept. Then, for the global context exploration, I might try to give them the benefit of the doubt that they did intend for an exploration to be identified, but if we look back at the instructions provided for this section, we can see that the instructions were just to choose a global context, and they give them the list. So there was no instruction to identify an exploration in the school's instructions, so that may be why they did not include an exploration up here in this section. So, based on the statement of inquiry, I looked down and there is something that they may have considered to be the exploration, so I'm going to go with that assumption just to give the benefit of the doubt. So I'll add a comment something like this. Based on the statement of inquiry, it appears that scientific principles may be the intended global context exploration. If so, this exploration can be identified in this section of the planner to clarify the selection. Then, because I did not really see much in the rest of the unit plan about scientific principles, I'll make a comment such as this. As currently described, scientific and technical innovation and scientific principles do not appear to align with the unit's learning process. Maybe the teacher just didn't write it in, or maybe they're not quite understanding what the purpose of the global context is. So I'm going to explain that just in case. The primary consideration when determining and identifying a unit's context and exploration is that it should clarify the real-world frame of reference through which the unit's conceptual understanding and content are explored. So I'm thinking if that is news to them, they may want to explore other options. So I'll include a comment such as exploring options for which global context and exploration is the best fit could result in further fine-tuning of the purpose and learning in this unit. So moving on to the statement of inquiry section, again, we started out with the statement of inquiry just entered verbatim, and then I am just going to, first of all, note the strengths. So these are the elements of whatever section it is that meet either the using or sharing level descriptors. And we'll look at those in just a second. But what I wrote was the statement of inquiry explicitly includes the identified concepts, systems, and structure, and what may be intended as a global context exploration, scientific principles. I'm also noting that the language used in the statement is understandable to MYP Year 3 students. The statement of inquiry makes sense. I'm not sure it makes sense in terms of the learning of the unit, but as a sentence, it makes sense. Then, after I've noted the strengths, I'm going to note the areas for further development. So some areas I noticed right off were that while there may be potential to explore elements of the statement of inquiry beyond the content of this particular unit, it doesn't have specific unit content in it, although it does refer to instruments, but that could apply to any orchestra unit. So while it may be transferable beyond the content of this unit, the transferability of the idea as a whole may be limited. I'm not sure how many times they're going to bring that up, although it could be. And then if it's true that throughout the orchestra units or in other music units they do talk about scientific principles in order to understand the structure and systems of musical instruments, if that's a very scientifically oriented program, then they could just disregard that comment that I made. That's why it's phrased in such tentative language. It may be limited. And in terms of the relevance of this statement in this particular unit, further details are needed in other sections of the unit plan to describe how the concepts and context included in this statement provide the focus for the unit's learning process. So that's a little bit of teaching. I really don't see much related to that statement of inquiry in the content or in the learning process in clear terms. So that's just letting them know that. And then the next step is to put some ideas for further development. So a possible step in developing the unit statement of inquiry as a clear focus for the unit's inquiries could be to first consider which concepts could most relevantly frame the learning. Then a conceptual understanding could be developed that expresses a meaningful dynamic relationship between the identified concepts. Once the transferable conceptual understanding that is meaningful to the purpose of the unit is developed, the identified contextual exploration can be incorporated into the sentence to form the statement of inquiry. So, although it does look like they understand this process a little bit, I'm going to provide that guidance just to help the further development. Oftentimes, I just wish I could sit down with any of the authors of a unit and go through it just more casually. But so just for you to know, and also for the teacher if you're listening. So we look at this statement of inquiry, and you see that it includes the required elements. It includes the concepts. It includes what I think might be, what they intend to be, the exploration. But it doesn't really express a relationship between structure and systems, right? So a conceptual understanding expresses a dynamic, clear relationship. How does structure impact systems? How do systems impact structure? I don't really see a conceptual idea as a whole that clarifies how this unit is going to explore the relationship between these two concepts that were identified. So my suggestion would be is if scientific principles was the context for perhaps a longer unit, I would support them in trying to find a relationship between those two concepts, making a conceptual understanding statement, and then incorporating the global context exploration to express a meaningful idea that's going to be explored in that particular context. The last element that's going to be included in the feedback is a reference. If it's pertinent, if it will be helpful, a reference is oftentimes added for further guidance. So in this case, a reference to the IB MYP unit planning video series is referenced. Once all the comments have been made, what's evident, the strength, and the areas for further development, the last thing that the reviewer needs to do in each section is to determine what beginning, using, or sharing level that section demonstrates. So you can see up here that in the first column, that represents a beginning level, the second column a using level, and the third column a sharing level. And what those refer to are the descriptors in evaluating MYP unit plans. So here's how I was thinking about that statement of inquiry. So here's how I was looking at these descriptors. The statement does include a key concept and related concept. It does include a specific global context exploration, although that's not specifically identified, but I'll give the benefit of the doubt. So it does combine the key and related concepts in some way. It does make sense. I'm not sure it's meaningful in terms of the learning in the unit, so it's a little bit confusing about what level to evaluate this at. It may mechanically connect them because the elements are present, but I'm not sure it has meaning in terms of the learning. So it does offer potential to transfer beyond the content of the unit, and it communicates in student-friendly language. It does not invite inquiry and engagement as evidenced in the unit plan, however, so it's a little bit unclear which level this statement of inquiry demonstrates. But since it doesn't really have relevance to the learning as described in the unit plan. One of the things that's going to help me determine what level, even though it does have some using level elements, what is going to tip the balance is reading this up here. So the most foundational element of a statement of inquiry is that it sets a conceptual understanding, which is a relationship between a key and related concept in a global context. And as we know, it needs to be the global context exploration to be in the using or sharing levels. But the most important thing is that that statement of inquiry needs to frame the classroom inquiry and direct purposeful learning. So because that is not clearly evident in the unit plan, this section would probably be indicated a 1. So you can see that the most important aspect of this feedback is the comments, right? Because there are some strengths in this statement of inquiry. And so it's the comments that are going to tell us really more information than that beginning level indicator. So the inquiry questions. The inquiry questions, there's one in each category, and we are going to check to see if these questions really unpack the statement of inquiry. Is it drawn from and inspired by the statement of inquiry? So it does have instrument. It refers to instruments. Often, so it has some aspect of the statement of inquiry. I don't see anything really that clarifies that scientific principles are going to be part of the inquiry that are guided by inquiry questions. I'm not sure about structure, although the conceptual question may imply it in some way. Why did the structure of the instruments develop as they have? That could have made it a little bit clearer. And systems, not sure but where systems comes in. So the first thing that I'm going to note in the feedback report are what is evident. There are 3 inquiry questions identified, 1 in each question category. I had a little bit of question whether the debatable question was truly debatable, and the conceptual question didn't really unpack any of the concepts, so I'm not sure about that, but I first write what is evident. Then the next thing I'm going to do is to provide what I notice are strengths. So I noticed that the question identified as debatable, so you notice I didn't say the debatable question because I still have some wonderings about whether it truly is debatable. The question identified as debatable appears to have relevance to the learning described in the unit. Is there a right way to hold a stringed instrument? So we know from seeing the description of the content and the learning process that they do talk about that. They do try to figure out what is the right way to hold a stringed instrument. However, I didn't see anything in the learning process or the content that talked about the origin of stringed instruments or looking at why today, the history of the development of orchestral instruments. So I do not include the comment that the factual and conceptual questions have relevance to the learning in the unit. But I do want to recognize that perhaps they do have those topics in there, they just didn't include it. So I'm going to write something like, the factual and conceptual questions may be relevant to exploring content related to the origins and development of modern-day orchestral instruments. These topics do not appear to be described in the content of the learning or the learning process of the unit. If these content areas are explored, these content-based questions could be included in the description of the learning process in terms of when and how they are used to prompt student inquiries. So I've said this before, perhaps in the other video, but it's news to some teachers when they get their feedback back that those inquiry questions actually should guide the inquiries, right? You just don't leave them in the inquiry section identified, but then you never see them again. You are going to see those questions again down in the description of the learning process. We want to see that those inquiry questions are actually used to guide the learning in the unit. Then I'm going to start with some reminders about what the inquiry questions are for. So as a reminder, in this section of the unit planner, All of the inquiry questions should be clearly drawn from and inspired by each of the concepts and the contextual exploration represented in the statement of inquiry. Once the unit's statement of inquiry is redeveloped to more clearly align with the learning in the unit, the inquiry questions can be reviewed to ensure that all of the questions are phrased to promote transferable understanding of the concepts, the relationship between the concepts, and the contextual exploration included in the revised unit. Then I'm going to remind them about using the inquiry questions. The unit's inquiry questions can then be used to frame a scaffolded set of learning engagements that promote a depth of understanding of each element in the statement of inquiry and the statement of inquiry as a whole. Then a little bit more. This I included quite a bit of detail here because I wasn't sure that it was clear that the nature of the inquiry questions was clear to the teacher. So, a little bit of a reminder, when considering the development or redevelopment of a unit's inquiry questions, it may be helpful to review the characteristics of each question type in order to promote a scaffolded approach during the learning process. And then I'm going to provide a description of what factual questions are used for, what conceptual questions are used for, and what debatable questions are used for. And you can read those in more detail in the review that's available in the resource folder. Then, again, there is a reference to some more guidance available in the MYP Unit Planning Inquiry Questions video. They can review that to see the backup for this guidance. Once all of the comments are added into the inquiry question section, then we're going to try to determine what level those questions demonstrate. So we're going to refer back to Evaluating MYP Unit Plans, and the very first thing that I would note is this description up here. The inquiry questions are drawn from and inspired by the statement of inquiry. So already I know, okay, so the most basic part of that is not so strong. So it also says that factual, conceptual, and debatable questions give shape and scope to the inquiry, which I don't see evidence of those questions except for how to hold an instrument in the description of the learning process. So already I'm thinking it may be more of a beginning level. But it does include examples of factual and conceptual questions. As I said, the debatable question maybe doesn't hold the tension and import that a debatable question might. It has minimal connections with each other and the purpose of the unit, except for that last question. So again, I'm not sure they are rigorous enough. There might be too few. I'm not sure. But what's going to influence my decision about the level is this up here. The most fundamental part is that it needs to be drawn from and inspired by the statement of inquiry. If that's not present, some of these other descriptors aren't quite as weighty. So again, I will probably be indicating a beginning level, not because there aren't some strengths in those questions, but because fundamentally they aren't drawn from and inspired by the statement of inquiry. Moving back to the unit plan, we're in the objectives section. So in this section, they listed a standard. They didn't write them out. This is actually content, so that would probably be better served in the content section and writing out what those benchmarks are so they can refer back to them as they're developing the unit. But they do note here that, in general, Objective A, Arts Objective A, and Objective B are going to be addressed. They don't identify the strands, and they do have sort of a unit-specific description of how those objectives are going to be addressed. In this section, it's best if you just list the objectives as they are stated in the guide, including the objective strands, so that those can be referenced back when you're describing the summative assessment and the learning process, so you're reminded of those descriptions and those command terms. So in this section, the comment is going to say what is evident in the unit plan. So in the objectives and content sections, it's noted that arts objectives A and B are intended to be addressed in the unit, and the specific objective strands are not identified. And after I've noted what's evident in terms of the objectives, I'm not really clear on whether there is a strength there. So I'm going to say, as this unit is further developed, it will be beneficial to clearly identify the arts objectives and the specific objective strands that are addressed. Identifying the year level, including the published MYP descriptors of the selected objective strands, will add clarity to the unit plan. Then, further details can also be provided in the description of the learning process to clarify how development in each identified objective strand is supported. Then, just a little bit of reminders is that in shorter units, such as a 6-hour unit or in the early years of the program, it can be beneficial to address selected objective strands. However, if the time frame of the unit is expanded, it may be beneficial to consider the following guidance. So this is about the arts. So if you're not an arts teacher, this may not apply to you, although all 4 objectives in all subject groups are intended to support each other. They may not all be included in a unit plan, but they do work together at some level. So I include a quote from the Arts Guide about reminding how the 4 objectives meet the aims of the arts. Now we're looking at summative assessment. So again, they don't include the strands that are going to be assessed in each of these tasks. So I'm going to remind myself what they were and then go back. And again, what is evident? So I'm going to describe for myself mostly so that I can see what is evident in the unit plan. I'm going to describe each of those tasks, and I'm going to identify how they say, how the teacher says that they are going to be assessed with which criterion. So again, we try to find a strength. These tasks appear to provide students with opportunities to develop and demonstrate a basic level of achievement related to some formative aspects of criteria A and B. So we're trying to recognize, well, it has some relevance, but again, another quote from the Arts Guide. It's important to consider that while skill development is critical part of disciplinary learning, practical skills alone are not enough. So you can see that in terms of the art objectives and aims, it doesn't really include a creative element. So it may be beneficial to reconsider the breadth and depth of the purpose and content and assessment in this unit. So one idea, as I've mentioned earlier, is that this might be an orientation as part of a longer unit. So trying to recognize that it's still important content and purpose, but maybe a longer unit needs to be developed that has more creative elements. So the other thing that needs to be noted is that because I can't really tell by the description how it's being assessed, I'm going to provide some guidance in the type of tasks that are appropriately assessed with the arts criteria. So if you're an arts teacher, you can go back to this review and see some of this guidance related to criterion A and criterion B, which the description didn't really clarify. So again, I'm going to say as the unit is further developed, statement of inquiry reconsidered, the summative tasks can be reviewed to ensure that they provide students with meaningful opportunities to demonstrate their understanding of the revised statement and that those tasks can be assessed with the identified criteria strands. The other thing, just because this is an arts unit, is that students must use the arts process journal in all arts courses. So in the description, it's important to clarify how the journal is used and assessed in the unit. Because it doesn't have a creative element, that's another reason why I didn't really seem to need a process journal. So that's another reason why the unit maybe needs to be expanded. Okay, so it explains some more things that needs to be clarified in the description, and then it gives some further guidance. Resources. Now I'm going to need to determine what level that description of the summative tasks demonstrates, and I can see that it has limited, or I'm not clear on what the connection is to the statement of inquiry. I'm not sure if it clearly addresses the objectives. It may not be challenging enough for a full unit, and it doesn't clearly describe what students will do to demonstrate understanding. So all of that guidance provided is supposed to support the teacher in being able to further develop that section so that it demonstrates a sharing level. And we're on to the approaches to learning section, and you can see that this unit planner provides all of this guidance. I'm not sure if these are included just automatically in the school's format, but these very general skills are not as helpful as if the teacher identified the specific skill indicator on their own. So this is a case where the planner itself, if these are pre-entered, it's very helpful to have the category and the clusters pre-entered in this format, but it's helpful if the teacher, him or herself, identifies the specific skill indicator. These are so broad and general that it's not as helpful. So I can see that intended is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different skills are intended to be supported in this unit, and that's what I'm going to say is evident. I'm going to write that there appear to be types of skills identified in 6 skill clusters. Descriptions are also provided in terms of how students implicitly apply the skill types during the unit. So trying to identify some strengths. Then I'm going to provide some guidance. So there were a lot of skills noted, and again, it's unclear whether those were pre-entered or the teacher entered those. So I'm going to say, as a reminder, only those skills that will be explicitly taught and intentionally practiced should be included in this section. And then, because the skills description doesn't really identify specific skills, for example, down here, critical thinking, analyzing and evaluating issues and ideas, that's a skill indicator, but it doesn't really offer any strategy. How are they going to be taught to analyze? How are they going to be taught to evaluate? What issues and ideas are they going to analyze and evaluate? What contexts are they going to transfer, and how are they going to know how to do that? So there's not really any specificity here. So I'm not sure how this particular section is going to guide the development of the learning process. So I'm going to provide some guidance that, as a reminder, that specific approaches to learning skill indicators need to be intentionally selected for each unit based on the specific skills that students may need in order to develop in one of 3 aspects of the unit. And this section should really describe how are those skill indicators intended to support each skill indicator. How is each skill indicator supposed to support what aspect of the unit? So the 3 aspects that are available to support through ATL skills are to demonstrate the upper bands of the specific subject group objective strands. So you're going to identify one skill indicator for one objective strand, what if that connection is made, how it's a skill indicator that's going to support them in effectively participating in a specific learning experience, or to effectively demonstrate their learning in the summative task. For instance, if it was a performance task and they tend to get nervous, then the teacher might identify a self-calming strategy that they're going to practice in order to be able to perform their summative performance more effectively. So then it gives guidance about how to describe the approaches to learning skills. And because there were 6 skills in 6 hours, we're going to include the comment that about shorter units. Care needs to be taken to ensure that there's enough time to teach, practice, and provide students with feedback on their progress in each of the identified skills. So you're not just listing skills and then not actually teaching them. So there's a little reminder about that, and then some further guidance resources. To try to determine what level is demonstrated, I'm going to go back to evaluating MYP unit plans, and I can see that it was unclear how those particular skills were intended to support the unit's objectives. There was brief identification of how the skills are supported, but it didn't really say what strategies were taught. And then there maybe had limited opportunities to support independent learning, but that wasn't very clear. So these bottom descriptors in evaluating MYP unit plans, it's not really possible for reviewers to assess since they don't know what the school's larger plan is. Those descriptors are more for the school and the teachers themselves to try to make sure that their ATL skill program develops over time. So again, in this section, it's probably more of a beginning level. And moving down to content. We're going to describe what the content looks like in the unit plan. The unit content is described in terms of what appears to be 2 benchmarks from an arts performance standard, the applicable arts aims and objectives, and a brief list of topics. So you can notice that the topics and the learning experience are clearly related. So I'm going to note that as a strength. The topics listed are reflected in the list of learning experiences. As this unit is currently identified as a 6-hour unit, it may be that this list represents a full description of the unit content. Again, I'm trying to recognize that perhaps that is all that was included in this 6-hour unit. Then moving on to the areas for further development, I'm going to note that if the unit is further developed and the time frame is extended, it will be beneficial to ensure that the content is clearly aligned with the unit's key and related concepts. I'm going to want to see what elements of content are related to systems and what elements of content are related to structure. I want to see that they are related, the content represents supporting the identified objective strands, which have not yet been identified, so I'm putting a reminder here, and it represents enough breadth and depth to challenge and prepare students for future study. So again, while getting your instrument, tuning it, and knowing how to maintain it are very important aspects of being in an orchestra class, it may not be enough breadth and depth to challenge and prepare students. So again, it might be a great intro to a longer unit. Then I'm going to give some guidance about how they might structure their description of their content in the future to provide more details and why that's important. Plus, a few references for them to refer to in order to determine the level demonstrated in the content section. I'm going to refer back to evaluating MYP unit plans. So it's not clear how that content is aligned with systems and structure. I'm not sure how it's aligned with the objectives. And I'm wondering if it might be too low expectations for a full unit. So again, the write-up of the content would demonstrate a beginning level. Moving on to the learning experiences and teaching strategies section, I'll describe what's evident. 5 brief descriptions of learning experiences are provided. And I'll try to identify a strength or at least just a recognition that the learning experiences and the content are aligned, and some tips for further development if the unit is extended. So I'm going to describe that the outline of the learning process needs to be presented in a clearly sequential format and what types of additional details might be included. So there's a big long list of the types of things that the teacher can consider including in their outline of the learning process, and then there are some references for further guidance. So to determine the level demonstrated in the description of the learning process, I'm going to refer back to the descriptors in evaluating MYP unit plans, and I'll note that it requires further development and additional details. It doesn't clarify how students explore the concepts, systems, and structure, or how the context, scientific principles is used to frame the unit. I'm not sure. I mean, it may not be developmentally appropriate. It could be. It definitely is good for a beginning, at least introduction to a unit. So it's a little unclear there. And I'm not sure what types, if they have inquiry-based teaching. It seemed more teacher-centered in terms of demonstration and support. So the learning experiences and teaching strategies might also demonstrate a beginning level. Again, it's a beginner teacher, so I wouldn't feel bad about all the beginning levels that are being indicated. It's just where the development of the unit is at, and a follow-up unit could include way more substantive content and learning process, which might be easily combined with this unit, and it could be absorbed and be a really productive and effective set of learning experiences and content. Moving on to formative assessment. Again, it looks like this format, this unit planner format, is trying to be helpful for the teacher to try to guide them a little bit. Makes it a little bit unclear for the reviewer. We can see that there is formative teacher observation. So they're saying that teacher observation is one method for providing feedback to students. Then they're saying that pair share is a way. Maybe that's for peer feedback, but we don't know when or how. And they're giving looks like a summative task. It's the maintenance study guide, as also maybe formative check-ins, but it's unclear what the formative assessments are. So the comment is going to describe what's evident. 2 types of formative feedback and 1 specific formative task are listed: teacher observation, student pair share, and the maintenance study guide. We're going to find a strength and note that ongoing teacher observation and peer sharing and feedback can provide valuable types of ongoing opportunities for students to demonstrate their knowledge, understanding, and skills as they prepare for summative assessment tasks. Those types of formative assessment and feedback can also provide teachers with opportunity to monitor evidence of student learning and make any needed adjustments to the learning experiences. So trying to note that those are some good ideas. We just need some more details. And the comments are going to note that further details are needed to clarify how the maintenance study guide is used and the type of feedback that's provided, and then some tips on it. As this unit is further developed, it may be beneficial to organize it into 2 categories: the informal feedback types, like that ongoing teacher observation, and then the specific formative tasks. And it clarifies that in particular they need to identify which formative task provides students to practice and receive explicit feedback on each of the criterion strands they need to demonstrate in the summative assessment task. That would add clarity to this section of the unit plan. Not that maybe students get a numeric achievement level in those formative tasks, although they could. That's fine if your teachers and students understand that those are not really going to influence the summative marks, but they are going to provide clarity on where the student stands in terms of those criterion strands. Then you can use the numeric marks. However, descriptive feedback in terms of the descriptors in those criteria strands may be even more helpful to the student and beneficial. And then they are going to get some additional references towards further guidance to determine the level demonstrated in formative assessment. We're going to once again refer back to Evaluating MYP unit plans, and the using level is not all of that, doesn't set a super high bar, so it does align with the knowledge, understanding, and skills it appears to somewhat required for success, right? They're giving feedback, they're having that monitoring, and they do align with the summative assessment. It provides opportunities, although it's not described what types of explicit feedback is provided. It might provide opportunities, so I'm not really sure. It might be limited. It might just provide opportunities. It does create some evidence that teachers can use. So these words, some, and some opportunities, if we've been giving a lot, noting that a lot of the sections have a beginning level, the formative assessment section is one aspect of the planning where the using level might be appropriate. And this probably would be a discussion between the reviewer and the senior reviewer. Does it demonstrate a beginning or a using level? And it probably demonstrates more of a beginning level, but in some cases the reviewer might feel like they need to provide some encouragement, and so a using level might be demonstrated. But I think that the senior reviewer and the reviewer would probably have a discussion about that. Then we look at the differentiation section, and this particular planner provides some tips on the types of differentiation that the teacher might want to reference. In this case, the teacher noted personal attention as differentiation, and then some differentiation for the base instruments. They're going to use fourths instead of fifths. So what's evident is that differentiation is described as teacher support as needed in changing strings and alternative content to support the tuning of bass instruments. We're going to recognize that those two forms of differentiated support, they do support aspects of learning needs related to content and process. Content and process are not specifically noted, but we are recognizing that in terms of fourths and fifths of content, and then teacher support for the process. But areas for further development as the unit is further developed, identifying additional specific strategies and resources to support differentiated learning in terms of specific unit content, specific learning experiences, and the identified assessment task products might provide further opportunities for addressing the individual learning needs in this particular unit and for this particular cohort of students. We often see some generic lists provided in the differentiation section that are just types of differentiation that they just say, oh, we use these in every unit. But what is helpful is if it's pre-thought about how specific content, specific learning engagements, and specific aspects of the product or outcome, how those are differentiated. So it gives a tip of how it might be organized to more clearly represent the differentiation that happens in the unit, and then there are some documents referenced for further support and guidance. To determine the level, once again, we're referring back to Evaluating MYP unit plans, and we can see that it documents few or generic strategies that meet the needs. It addresses in a very limited way the learning support requirements. So there's really not a whole lot of information there, which may be a result of the very short, limited content unit, but that is what is evident in the description of the differentiation. So once again, a beginning level is demonstrated. And getting down to resources, we see that their instruments are listed, although not the specific instruments, and then some supplies for cleaning and holding their instruments. So that is identified as what is evident. Equipment needed during the unit, the instruments, shoulder rests, rosin, and cleaning cloth are listed as resources. And those equipment items are clearly supportive of the learning in the unit, so that's going to be noted. And then some ideas for further developing this section as the unit is further developed. So it's saying to provide a brief description of all of the specific resources used by the teacher and available for students that will provide clear access to the information and learning environments necessary for achieving the unit's purpose. And here's a long list of additional types of resources and resource details that might be considered for not only this unit, but other units. So a whole list of types of details that would help to clarify and extend the information provided in this section of the unit plan. So there is a reference for further guidance provided, and then we are going to look back at the Evaluating MYP unit plans to determine what level the descriptions provided in this section of the unit plan demonstrate. So we can see that it provides some information. It's not clear if it supports differentiation, doesn't really support multiple points of view, doesn't consider appropriate technology integration. The reviewer doesn't really consider this type of thing if it's not appropriate for the unit. It doesn't bring the level down if technology integration would not really even match. But they do look for the general types of level that the description as a whole demonstrates. So again, this section probably demonstrates the beginning level, but there's lots of guidance provided for the teacher if this unit plan is extended and built out further in the future. And now we're down to the reflection section, and we've already gone over what's in this, so we're going to note what is evident. In general, just sort of brief notes are provided in all three stages of reflection. And noting a potential strength is that the notes in all three stages of the teaching regarding the use of the checklist may be particularly useful as the unit is further developed. So we're trying to point out that something very specific that was intended and then reported back on throughout the stages of reflection, that is a good idea. That creates a strong reflective response. And because it was such minimal reflection, the areas for further development are just very general. Consideration of additional aspects of the written, taught, and assessed curriculum may further strengthen the development of this unit, and then some potential references to refer to get more ideas for reflection. Sometimes when there is more reflection and something very specific is not included, then these feedback comments might be more extensive. But because this is so minimal, we just give a very general feedback and then some suggestion to look at the guiding questions that are provided to get more ideas for reflection. And then we are going to look at evaluating MYP unit plans once again to try to determine the level that's demonstrated. And as you can probably guess, it documents partial reflection, and it captures some general observations about what went well. That checklist seemed to go well in general, except for a little bit they wanted to improve next time, but didn't say why or how. So again, this section would demonstrate a beginning level. So we made it. Even though that was long, it's still impossible to really express all of the thought process that goes into reviewing a unit. But I hope you're able to get some sense of the process that reviewers go through to try to both understand each unit and to do the best they can to provide helpful feedback. Remember that the BQC is considered a service to schools, so reviewers try to take the approach of being a mirror for what can be found in the unit plan and to offer helpful suggestions for further development. They are not the judge and jury of the efficacy of your curriculum or your teaching. As pointed out in part 1 of this BQC Demystified session, I think it's important to repeat that there are 3 purposes for the amount of unit planning detail that BQC feedback suggests. 1. The unit plans are intended to help current teachers fully consider all aspects of MYP philosophy and pedagogy when developing the unit. This pre-thinking optimizes the chances that these elements will actually be implemented in the taught curriculum. Of course, the taught curriculum might not go exactly as described in the unit plan, but that's all right. The unit will still have a well thought out foundation and any needed resources will be ready. The other purposes are to support the transparency that is needed in collaborative planning and to create a legacy of continuity in the school's middle years program, meaning that even if teachers change, the new teachers will have a clear picture of the previous teaching and learning and will at least have a starting place to begin adapting or developing their own unit plans. So I hope this video has been helpful and that everyone stays safe and well as we navigate these challenging times. If you have specific questions, you can find me at dianempsmith@gmail.com. And if you'd like to check out other video-based resources that I've made, you can find these on YouTube.